So our agenda today is, what is a 401k? I know most of you on here probably know that. Why do we even have them? Sounds good to me too, Chris. Thank you. Number three, what are benefits? What are the rules? When do you retire? How does it pass upon death? Big ones that people are going to be talking about, though, is the tax time bomb. You'll see there's a lot of clickbait on the internet about that. What is going to happen to future tax rates? I'm going to talk about that. And should we be in the Roth 401k? Roth 401, traditional 401, do I roll it out? There's a lot to consider with that. So what's the 401k and why is it here? Well, we roll back the clock back to the 1980s. Actually, there was a provision in the IRS tax code. We won't make it boring, but in 1977, that's the birth of the 401k. But it's not for another 3 years that a CPA, when doing something else, stumbles upon it, writes the IRS to say, hey, here's what I think this thing means. Am I right? They said, yes, you are. And so it's not until 1980 that we even know that this 401k deal exists. Then it's not until the mid 80s that we even start using it on a regular basis. So a lot of what we talk about as advisors and why maybe it's a little different, I just want you to keep this in perspective. When I go before the 401k, we're average Americans. We're average people actively buying, selling stocks, bonds, or mutual funds. So a lot of people would say, well, Mike, wait a minute. My granddad, or my parents, they had stock. Cool. Were they opening the paper on Sunday going, oh, Ford's up 3 1/4. Benny, call our guy. Let's go ahead and sell. No. They might have bought it, but they filed it away. They might have owned some old Kent Bank stock, that sort of thing, but they filed it away. It was a buy and hold strategy. But with the 401k, all of a sudden, we introduce everyday Americans into mutual funds, into the stock market, and they're actively buying and selling stocks, bonds, mutual funds. Completely changes the landscape. And what's important about this then is think as an industry. People say, well, how long has the industry been around? Hundreds of years. How long have we been around the way it looks today? Since the mid 80s. Because if I go before the mid 80s, we were not helping average everyday Americans buy and sell stocks, bonds, mutual funds. Now we do. So we've only been at this then, if it's been since the mid 80s, for what? 35 years? Maybe going on 40? Consider that. And then think, well, wait a minute, when did we help people start pulling money out? Well, if I roll the clock 10 years forward, if they start in the mid 80s, how about mid 90s? What's the probability that the average American was going to be able to take a meaningful portion of their retirement income out of something they'd only been putting the money away into for what, 10 years? Probably not very high. Because if it was high, here's what we'd say. Hey, when you want to retire, let us know. You do you until 10 years before. And 10 years before, that's when we get serious. We don't say that, though, do we? We say the earlier you start, the better, because of compounding interest. So I'd actually argue it's not till the mid-2000s, when we've had about 20 years of putting money in and accumulation and deferral compounding interest, that it becomes common that we help people start pulling money out of the 401k. And that's where we'll kind of go in at the end. And that's why behavioral finance, I think that's the number one thing advisors help clients with, is behaviors. Understanding, here's what your goals are. Well, let's define those goals, because I meet people all the time where they say, well, I want to do X, Y, and Z. And when you put it in perspective on what they have to sacrifice to do X, Y, and Z, we find out they don't really want to do that. It's kind of like, well, I want to climb Everest. Okay, well, you're going to train for 2 years and there's still a large likelihood you're going to die. And they're like, Boyne Mountain seems good. Maybe I'll do Boyne. Can I do Boyne? Yeah, we'll train for about a half a day. You'll be fine. So as a behavioral advisor, we identify goals, clarify goals, and then align your actions with those goals. So that's, why do we have the 401k? Well, it's largely because once they came onto the scene, employers found it cheaper to get rid of the traditional pension. Because traditional pension, lifetime income, it was awesome. People like them. But if the investment results aren't great enough, the employer's on the hook. So by moving to the 401k, they put you on the hook. Less risk. It's just where we've gone. So what are the benefits? Now, a lot of times we can accumulate a lot more in a 401k than what the value would have been of a pension. The issue, though, and why I would say it doesn't often happen, at least from what I've seen, is because people don't start saving early enough and they don't put enough away. And it's just more difficult. The pension was just kind of automatic. Whereas the 401k, you're going to have to make more of a conscious effort. There can be ups and downs, and people tend to invest differently in the downs and invest, maybe in a poor way, and tend to invest differently in when the market's doing well. But the benefits are that it's tax deductible. You can get an employer match. You can get investment diversification. Like inside the plan, there's going to be a lot of options that you can pick from. So that's good. Options are great, but sometimes we get overwhelmed by all of these options. Or sometimes we don't use things right. Like as an example, there's target date funds. Most plans today have a target date fund. So you want to retire in, let's say 2030, you'd pick a 2030 retirement or target date fund. The mistake I see a lot of people make, though, is they get the target date fund and then they get some stock funds and then maybe even another target date fund. Understand, when you use a target date fund, it's designed to be the one and only thing in that 401k. So how much money can you put away? Well, a lot per year, much more than what most people are doing. You can see, and we're also going to tape this presentation. So if you're watching this later on, just understand that these are the amounts that are as of today. But you can see an individual employee can put away about $20,000 a year, can defer that, can defer the tax. Now, not their Social Security tax, not their FICA, but their state and federal tax. They can defer that up to about $20,000 a year. If you're a little bit older, it can be about $27,000. Some plans will allow you to pull money out at 55. There's specific benefits in a 401k if you become unemployed or retired of keeping it as a 401k. There's a rule that will allow you to pull money out at 55 that you don't get in an IRA. So a lot of times we talk, and we're going to talk about today, does it make sense to roll over? Maybe. Advisors often want to tell you to roll it over because, quite frankly, most can only get paid that way. Now, one of the things we want to see with advisors in that relationship is minimizing conflicts of interest. So when you use a fiduciary who is fee-based, now you can have fee only. It means they'll only charge a fee. You can have commission only, means they only use products that have a commission. Fee-based means they can use either. And that's not, in my opinion, I'm biased here. I think that's better because there are times that a commission makes sense. There are times that just a straight fee makes sense. And there's a time we shouldn't charge a fee at all. But fee-based would mean that conflict of interest could be gone, because a lot of times we could just charge you an annual fee to manage the 401k. We could charge you a percentage of assets, just like if you rolled them over while it's inside the 401k. So oftentimes advisors want to roll it over because that's the only way they can make an income. Not all advisors. So ask those questions. You can always ask the advisor, how do you get paid? Let them answer. If they can't answer it quickly and easily, bad answer. Age 55, there can be a benefit to keep it in the 401k depending on how you want to retire. If I go into a traditional IRA, I can't pull money out without a penalty, without using some sophisticated tools like what's called a 72T distribution, and there's a few others. But typically, the time where I can pull money out without a penalty from the IRS now becomes 59.5. So again, if you're retiring a little bit earlier, maybe it makes sense to leave in the 401k. And then age 72, that's the new required minimum distribution date. So at 72, if you're no longer working, you got to start pulling money out. And that's kind of a moot point because most people will no longer be working at that. But interestingly down here, especially for some self-employed people, this can be why a 401k can make sense, even in a small company. Look at what between the employer and the employee, the contribution limit's really high, over $75,000. So what do you do when you retire? We've kind of addressed some of this. Do you keep the money in the plan? Well, sometimes. Now, understand, though, when you keep in the plan, even if an advisor could charge you 1% to be in the plan or roll it out to be 1%, probably at some point they're not going to really want to deal with that other plan. They're going to want to deal with the companies they're used to dealing with. And it can be because there's larger investment choices. Oftentimes that's it. And some of it's just ease. We've helped people keep money elsewhere and make investment decisions at, they call these custodians, other companies. In the end, though, sometimes we give instructions for what those companies need to do, and they don't do it, and it creates a headache. So, but you do have to compare, and a good fiduciary is going to compare and say, hey, here's your costs over here, here's what they'd be over here, and here's what you're getting over here. A good fiduciary shouldn't try to be cheaper, by the way. Oftentimes, I remember earlier on in my career, people would say, well, are you going to be more expensive? And I was kind of afraid to say if we were. Oftentimes we weren't. But I look at it now and go, in the examples where we are, yeah, we're more expensive than what you have. You're paying next to nothing, but you're getting next to nothing. We're giving a lot of benefit here. And here's the things we're doing. Again, a lot of times it's less expensive. And I'll look at them and go, hey, we're less expensive, but that should not be the reason why you're making this choice, because we're giving you a lot of benefits that you don't have over there. Tax planning. We're doing behavioral analysis with you. We're helping align, again, actions with goals. So do you keep it in the plan? You can. But I probably, if it were me, even if I wanted to do this myself, barring some unique circumstances like that rule of 55 there, I'd probably still move it out to like a Fidelity or TD Ameritrade, that sort of thing, into an IRA where I had control of it. The big one here, though, that people ask, so let's take an easy one. Do you cash it out? We know that so often, too often, people will cash out 401ks, especially when they change jobs. They'll say, Mike, it's only got $3,000 into it. I'm just going to take it. I get a new TV. Yay. Yeah, but here's the thing, that $3,000, let's say you're 45 years old, that $3,000, if you let it sit till you're 65, maybe it's $6,000, maybe it's $8,000. I don't know. But what I do know is you won't still have that TV. Oftentimes, the biggest impact to our retirement isn't one decision. It's a bunch of small decisions. So I would say when you have that small 401k, it's a small decision, but keep it in, roll it into something else, roll it into an IRA. The big one is down here at the bottom. Do I convert to a Roth IRA? There's a few thoughts there, right? Is it mathematically better? People say, well, if the account grows from 500,000 to $1 million, now it's tax-free. But the math is the same, because if you have 500,000 and let's just say it's a 20% tax, just to make it easy, and I'm going to pay it now, I'm going to have 400,000. Okay. And if my 400,000, if I say my investment's going to double, I'll have 8. Now let's imagine you don't pay the tax. I got 500,000, it doubles, it becomes $1 million, and I pay a 20% tax. I still have 8. So the issue becomes, what will tax rates be in the future? How aggressively am I going to want to pull this money out? Well, that is going to be highly influenced by needs, and your needs are going to be highly influenced by inflation. So the argument to convert to a Roth should be, what tax bracket am I in today? What one do I think I'm going to be in? And how much do I think I'm going to want? How much am I going to want to take out on an annual basis? And there's some behaviors here. So I've seen where people will convert. And by the way, you wouldn't want to convert 500,000 in 1 year. I wouldn't think. You might be in the same tax bracket as Tom Brady then. I mean, well, that might not be saying much now that he's retired, but I mean like Tom Brady actually, football playing Tom Brady. You don't want to brag that you're in the same tax bracket, because then all your friends, every time you go out to eat, they think you should be the one paying. But a lot of times there's a better way to do it. Be a little bit more systematic, a little bit more intentional. Do it on an annual basis in smaller chunks so you don't go into a new tax bracket. What you're really trying to consider is kind of how it makes you feel and what influence will it have on your future behaviors. So as an example, I've seen where we convert $25,000, let's just say. And let's just, again, to make it simple, let's say that that's a $5,000 tax. It's a really high tax, but just keep it easy. And what that person will do is, I can think of a specific example where the client was getting about a $6,000 tax return every year. So we converted enough to basically eat up the tax return. And our assumption was, and we had to see if it would work, is that they wouldn't, by not getting the tax return, mathematically you'd say, well, they're going to have to take more money out somewhere to make up what they didn't get back. But it doesn't always work that way. In their case, it didn't. They just slowed down. They just changed their consumption, their spending in different areas that they, without really even thinking about it, they didn't feel it. And so we see that sometimes. Can we eat away at that tax return by doing some conversions? And will you just naturally change your consumption behaviors? That's true for some. So there's a lot of behaviors to this. Sometimes people get more excited too, knowing it's tax-free. They'll increase the amount they invest. Well, those are things that kind of push the pendulum in favor of doing the Roth. Another key here, though, is that understand your Roth IRA should be invested differently than your traditional IRA. Your Roth 401k should be invested differently than your traditional 401k. Naturally, most people will have some stock and some bonds. If the Roth grows tax-free, which it does, then you want more of your growth in the Roth portion. Once you pass, whether it's a Roth or traditional at this point, there is a 10-year rule. That's part of the new, I think that was part of the Secure Act. So within 10 years of death, now beneficiaries, not spouses, but beneficiaries, non-spousal beneficiaries, will have to liquidate the asset. So that could be another reason why you want to go Roth, because if you've got quite a bit in that account, you might be able to convert that account over 20, 30 years, knowing that your family would have to do it over 10 years. So we can actually reduce taxes sometimes by doing that now rather than later. Not always. And that 10-year rule, again, it's fairly new. Spousal inheritance is important. Look at your beneficiary designations. Oftentimes people say, I don't need to worry about that. I got a trust. I got a will. It doesn't matter. If the beneficiary on your 401k is Martha, the ex-wife, guess what? It's going to go to Martha, the ex-wife, or Betty, the ex-wife, or Mark, the ex-husband, or whoever you've named on that designation form. If it's not your trust or your will, it's going to go to whoever you put on there, even if your trust or will are not congruent with that. So that's important. I've seen it. I've seen some examples where, God bless them, the ex-spouse disinherited the money and gave it to the new spouse. As you can imagine, that's probably not all that common. Taking tax bomb. The idea here is that you're building something that is completely taxable at some date. I think this is highly dependent on how old you are when you're looking at this. If you're in your mid-60s and we've got 3 more years until you retire, I don't know that I'm really looking at this as a tax bomb. If you're in your mid-50s, maybe so, 40s, possibly. I'm not convinced that the government's going to be able to raise taxes. We're running out of money. Let's be real. We got $30 trillion in debt. We're spending more and more every year. We had the highest we ever had. 61% of U.S. households did not pay a penny of federal taxes last year. So none of that points in the right direction, but it's really hard to increase taxes. An easier way is to increase them indirectly. Maybe that's a reason for inflation. Make it simple. If you doubled everyone's income and they were still broke, if somebody went from 50 grand to 100 grand, and at the end of the day, they didn't have any more money left, you would double the amount they paid in tax. So it'd possibly be a way, maybe that's the way, and that it would influence, by the way, the Roth IRA discussion, because it would mean instead of taking 50 grand out of the 401k each year, maybe now we need to take 100 because of inflation, which now bumps us into a new tax bracket. So inflation is something we should be talking about. I've been saying this for 10 years. Inflation cannot be ignored. It's something called reversion. In the math world, they call reversion to the mean. It's real simple. It sounds complicated, but it's simple. Think about it this way. We're in Michigan. I'm in Michigan. If we get a month with no snow in December, what will happen in January? It'll probably just pour with snow. Or put it differently, let's say our average temperature throughout the year is 45 degrees. What does that mean? It means we're going to have a whole lot of days at 90 and a whole lot of days at 0 and everything in between. If in the middle it's here, we're going to have a lot up here and a lot down here. Well, when you have a lot that's real low, like inflation was, when the average was about 3.5% and we had basically no inflation for over a decade, then you know there's going to be a period of time where you have a ton of inflation, and that's how you get an average. So it's something we should be planning for, should have been planning for. We've certainly been talking about it for over a decade with our clients. Math or reversion to the mean math term. It just means that after a period of, think about it, after a period of drought, what do you get? A period of rain. That's what happens. So will taxes rise in the future? I don't know. Again, I think about it. Almost everyone likes a tax break, right? They like it, except for Warren Buffett. But yet a tax break is really hard to pass. So if congressmen and women, legislators have a hard time passing something that people like, now the thing I am going to guess is that almost no one likes a tax increase. So if they have a hard time passing things that people like, imagine how hard it's going to be to pass something they don't like. The math doesn't look good. How are we going to be able to do that? Well, maybe the tax raise is to allow inflation to be here for a little bit. So when you just collect more in tax, the tax rates are the same. But if everyone's making twice, and in fact, there are people, behaviorally speaking, think about it. There's some people who go, if I made 100 grand, I know that's when I'd feel good. Part of their identity is based on their wage, what they accomplish professionally. And so to them, if all of a sudden they went from making 60 grand to 120 grand, but they're still broke at the end of the month, they're just happier being broke. So we do need to pay attention to inflation. Part of the reason it could be here is just a way to fix some of these problems. Because you'd say, well, if the cost of everything doubled, Mike, well, Medicare and Medicaid would double what they pay. Really? No, they wouldn't. Go around to most doctor's offices, your primary care physicians, you'll see a sign. That sign says something like this: no longer accepting new Medicare and Medicaid patients. Oh, by golly gee, why is that? Because they don't get paid as much on Medicare and Medicaid. And you go, well, Social Security increases each year. They have a cost of living adjustment. Come on, Mike, that's easy. Yeah, well, so a lot of fuel increased 30% last year? The increase in Social Security was 6%. That doesn't keep pace with inflation. Talk to anyone who's been retired for any amount of time. They'll tell you it does not keep pace with inflation. So if we have a big period of inflation, the real value of our debt would decrease. We won't spend proportionally more in Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, yet we'd collect more in taxes. So do you roll it out? The pros and cons, I think I've gone over that. The pros of rolling it into an IRA, you can get professional help. Keeping it inside the 401k, it's going to be difficult. There are advisors like myself that are willing to bill somebody. To be very candid, I think we're yet to actually do that. I've never had somebody where we manage their 401k not move it over to us later on. Maybe a dumb business decision. I don't know, but it seems to have worked. But there's more investment options when you get outside of the IRA. Probably very few people on this call care about crypto, but that's certainly something that if it's not available inside of an IRA today, it will be. Gold and silver, real estate even. But understand, you start getting into those type of things, there's especially gold, silver, and real estate, there's some big pitfalls. There's some serious rules. And understand, when you're talking to the IRS, typically it's not that, hey, I thought I was doing X and I did Y and I'm sorry, can I just undo it? It's typically, no, you can't. And here's your penalties. So cons are generally going to be probably cost. There's going to be, if you're going to be rolling it to an IRA, there's going to be a fee for that advisor. That fee may or may not be worth it. I can tell you, if you're getting an advisor that just basically gives you investment advice, it's probably not worth it, in my opinion. You can get that stuff free right online. Advisor, as I said earlier, I think their biggest weight is helping tame emotions, understanding emotional behaviors, understanding irrational behaviors, and try to identify why that behavior seemed rational to you. Because when we understand something's irrational, it doesn't align, this action doesn't align with your goals. And then we try to understand, so just instead of saying, well, that's irrational, if we then try to figure out as the advisor, why did you think it was rational? Why did you feel it was rational? Not only does it give us some empathy, it allows us to kind of think, understand your line of thinking, your line of thought, makes it easier for us to communicate. So probably, again, I'm biased being a behavioral advisor, but I think some of the biggest benefits advisors bring are identifying these behaviors that aren't consistent with what you're trying to accomplish. Very little, and you can do your own research, but very little of the outcome of your retirement savings is going to be dependent on the rate of return. It's going to be dependent on things you do, how you do it, what you put away, behaviors. So all of this was great. I always enjoy being with you guys. Remember, this webinar wasn't specific to your advice, but if you want specific advice, if you want it tailored to you, give us a call, spend 15 minutes, see if we're a good fit or not. Who we choose to take on has nothing to do with assets. We have a very, very simple rule. It's, does somebody need help? Do they want help? And can we help? That's who we choose to take on. I always love these places to say, well, we got an account minimum. If you got over 500,000, give us a call. And then on their website, they say something like this, right? I do what I do because I love seeing the impact I can make on people's lives. It really should have an asterisk at the end of that if you have an account minimum. And then it says, I love what I do because I can see the impact it makes on people's lives. Asterisk, as long as they pay me enough to do it. So you want to reach out, you want to have a cup of coffee, give us a call. You can call our office, 616-589-4004. It's 589-4004. Or you can actually set an appointment right here on this website, calendly.com, Michael J. Markey. I'd be happy to have a quick conversation with you. Give you any advice I can, any help I can. I'm here to help. So thank you to everyone for joining us. Thanks for being with us this whole time. God bless.